Kia ora. Hello and welcome. My name is Debbie and I will be reading the Kahutahuta for you today. It's an exciting little book from a little country called Aotearoa, New Zealand. And there are a whole lot of things that might be just a little bit different than what you'd expect. Now, you can read along with me as the pages turn across the screen, or you can just sit back and listen to the story. Either way, I'm truly thrilled that you've decided to join me on this adventure. Now, if you're all settled in and ready, let's begin. This is Chapter 4, a Winston chapter. When Commander Sparks suddenly jumped up in the middle of the night, whimpered and then went running out the doggy door, Katie knew he was rescuing another animal. She was annoyed that he woke her up and she thought some grumpy thoughts at him, but she didn't get angry until he came back. He knew he was supposed to let her sleep. After all, Katie wasn't a real animal doctor. All she really did was put ointment on their cuts and give the animals a nice place to rest while their hurts got better. That could always wait until morning, or even after breakfast. She had carefully explained all that to Commander Sparks, and he had made a bunch of dog noises that said he understood. Obviously, he hadn't. When he came back in with the hurt animal, he just stood by the little cot that was her bed, making little huffing noises and poking her with his nose until she rolled over and paid attention to him. "Oh no, is that a dead bunny?" Katie whispered angrily when she saw what the dog had in his mouth. It was all floppy and furry and blood was dripping off its ear. "I am not a rabbit," the thing in Commander Sparks' mouth said, annoyed. Its voice was small, like you would expect from something little, but also kind of growly. "And I am not very dead at all." That scared Katie. She was old enough to know that no matter what the cartoons, stories, and the movies said, little animals were not supposed to talk. She picked up the fairy wand that her dad had given her for Christmas. It wasn't big or heavy, but it was made out of hard plastic, and it would probably hurt the strange thing if it did something that made her have to thwack it. "Drop, Commander Sparks," she said. "Drop that thing right now." Commander Sparks thought a second, then rolled over and played dead. It wasn't what Katie had meant for him to do, but when he went to stick his tongue out like he was dead, he opened his mouth enough to let the bunny-eared thing climb out of his mouth and run away a little bit. It didn't run far, just over toward the doggy door. It was limping quite badly and squeaking a little every time it stepped on its left foot. It was hard to see in the mostly dark room, but there was enough light from the little window over the doggy door to see that the thing only looked a little bit like a bunny. It was about the size of a bunny, and it had floppy rabbit ears, but everything else was different. It had a pointy little face that looked kind of like a dog face, a tuft of fur that looked like a mustache, a long body, and a long furry tail. It had people kind of arms, but they were furry, and it had little hands. Huffing indignantly, it adjusted its vest, which looked like it had been made out of the top of an old work boot. And then, after thinking hard for a moment, it must have decided it had better try to look scary. It snarled and tried to look fierce. "Stop it!" Katie giggled. It looked very silly. "Do not be evil at me," it squealed. "You really do talk," Katie said. "That wasn't leftover dream bits or anything." "I do talk," it huffed angrily. "I speak." Commander Sparks growled at the creature and made some scolding noises. "Stop that," Katie scolded the dog. "Yes, stop that, you foul and evil beast," the thing said. The bunny-eared thing looked at Katie's sparkly fairy wand and looked terrified. Then it tried to look fierce again. "Beware, you evil witch, for I am Winston, the witch slayer, slayer of witches and many other evil and witch-like things that need slaying." "I'm not an evil witch," Katie said. "This is just a toy." "An evil wizard?" it asked. "I am not an evil wizard," Katie said. "Boys are wizards." "Perhaps you are an evil rhinoceros?" it asked, very uncertain. "Do I look like an evil rhinoceros?" Katie huffed. "How would I know?" It scowled at her like she had asked the dumbest question that anyone had ever asked. "Evil rhinoceroses are invisible." "Do I look invisible?" Katie was getting a little annoyed. "No, I suppose not." It looked at Katie suspiciously. I am just a little girl, Katy said. My name is Katy. That sounds like an evil name, it said. It's not, Katy said. Promise? Double promise, Katy assured it. Well then, hello, just a girl, Katy. I am called Winston. Winston waited a second and then meekly added, Winston the Brave. I thought you were Winston the Witch Slayer, Katy frowned. It's the same thing, Winston said. Not really, Katy said. You have to be brave to slay evil witches, Winston said. That's just simple science. Yes, I suppose so. Katy wasn't convinced, but she didn't feel like arguing about it. So instead she said, Well, hello, Winston the Brave, and pardon me for asking, but what exactly are you? What am I? Winston sounded confused and had to think very hard for a second. I suppose I am a Winston, and I am a very annoyed Winston. I have been carried hither and thither in the jaws of your horrendous creature and completely slobbered upon. I am almost annoyed enough to slay that foul beast of yours. Commander Sparks is not a foul beast, Katy said. Have you smelled its breath? Winston asked. Okay, his breath is pretty gross, Katy admitted, especially when he licks you. You let it lick you? Winston jumped backwards in horror, squeaking when he landed on his hurt leg and fell to his bum. Katy laughed. Furious, Winston hopped up to his feet, squeaking again when he landed on his hurt leg and fell back to his bum. When that made Katy laugh again, he shook his little fist at her and said, Stop laughing at me! What kind of uncivilized monster are you? I am very civilized, Katy assured Winston, still giggling a little. If you were civilized, you would say something nice instead of threatening to boil my bones and serve me as soup for supper. Winston tried to look mean and scary, but he just looked kind of silly. I never threatened to make soup out of you, Katy said. But you never said anything nice either, Winston said. That is exactly the same as threatening to eat me. No, it isn't, Katy said. Yes, it is, Winston huffed. It is exactly the same. Katy tried very hard to think of something nice to say about the silly little animal. I guess that's a nice coat. It is a vest, Winston grumped. Then it is a very nice vest, Katy said. Thank you. Winston sat as straight as he could and suddenly looked all prim and proper and proud. I made it myself. Making it was mostly just cutting the armholes, but that was very hard to do. I suppose it would be, Katy said. But that makes it all the better for when I am out slaying foul beasts, Winston said, trying to make his odd little voice sound big. Is that how you hurt your leg? Katy asked. How would I hurt my leg making a vest? Winston asked, rolling his eyes and shaking his head as if he thought that Katy was not very smart at all. I mean slaying foul beasts, Katy huffed. Did you hurt your leg slaying foul beasts? It was not just any foul beast, Winston said dramatically. It was the foulest of all evil beasts. For I battled the invincible Kahutahuta itself, a monster as big as the biggest of big things, with a mouth full of 1,006 fangs, and claws like 1,000 really big and very scratchy claws. Sounds scary, Katy said. Scary is not nearly a big enough word for it, Winston exclaimed. It came after me in the dread of night. It snuck up on me, moving as silent as all the quiet that ever was, and then it was just there, its eyes gloggling at me with evil as it pounced upon me in the most uncivilized manner. And you killed it? Katy asked. Mostly, Winston said proudly. Mostly? Katy asked, suspicious. How do you mostly kill a monster? One of its fangs bit clean through my most favourite ear, and it knocked me all a tumblebum with a swing of its hideously ugly head, but I was too ferocious for it. I valiantly fell down a very steep hill, and then fearlessly crawled really fast through some bushes, and then ran bravely away. Winston made a big gesture with his arms, and tried to make it sound like running away was heroic. How is running away almost killing it? Katy asked. The Kahutahuta is invincible, Winston seemed quite annoyed with having to explain things to Katy. "It can only be killed by running away, so you can kill it later." "Oh." Katy slid off her cot and inspected Winston's ears. There was indeed a large chunk bitten right off the end of one of them. "I guess you did pretty good then." "Would you expect anything less from Winston the Fearless?" he asked, as if insulted. Katy put some ointment on his ear. "I thought you were Winston the Brave." Winston pulled his ear out of her hand and inspected the ointment, sniffing at it and then tasting it. "It's exactly the same thing." "I don't know about that, but I guess you would have to be both brave and fearless to quite nearly mostly kill something like the Kahutahuta." "Indeed," Winston said proudly. "So do you have any other cuts or scratches?" Katy asked. "Nay." Winston suddenly remembered that his leg was hurt and clutched at it like he was in agony. "Just this leg. I am afraid the bone is quite and truly implied." "Is that bad?" Katy asked. She was worried for Winston, but also a little confused. Implied really didn't sound like the right word. "I fear so," Winston said. "I may well expire." "Well, I don't know what to do about an implied leg," Katy said. "Maybe resting will help." "Perhaps," Winston sighed. "We can only hope." Katy looked around the shadowy darkness of her room, searching for something for Winston to sleep in or on. An animal that could talk needed something like a real bed, but her doll beds from her little plastic dollhouse were far too small. The only other thing she could think of was her old toy baby pram. It was made for larger dolls. "How's this for a bed?" she asked. "I am not sure," Winston said. "It is quite profound for a bed." "Well, maybe you should try it." She lifted Winston into the baby pram and pushed it over by her little chair. Winston should probably be able to use the chair to climb out of it when his leg was a little less implied. "It has a little spongy pad for a mattress and a little pillow, and you can use this tea towel for a blanket." After a bunch of harumphing and grumbling, Winston lay down and pulled the tea towel up to his chin. "This is a horrible bed," he declared, yawning. "It is truly dreadful, and I am most insulted that you would make me sleep in something so vile." "Well, I guess I could ask Commander Sparks to take you back to where he found you," Katy suggested. "However, this shambolic little bed is a tiny bit nicer than being dead and eaten by the Kahutahuta," Winston said, yawning. "So I shall not be so rude as to storm off." "That's good," Katy said. "And I do suppose it is even a little bit more nicer than being alive and eaten by the Kahutahuta, because that would be worse than being already dead when it eats you," Winston said. "Scientifically speaking, of course." "Good night, Winston." Katy crawled back into her bed. "Good night, just a girl, Katy." Katy was just about back to sleep when Winston asked, "Are you most certain that you are not evil?" "Good night, Winston," Katy grumped. "I will be very disappointed if I wake up and find that you have boiled my bones for soup," Winston said, yawning again. "I don't know how to make bone soup," Katy assured him. "Oh, I guess that is that then," Winston said sleepily. "Good night, Winston," Katy said again, and this time Winston quit talking. The next morning, Winston was up early and he was keen to help Katy care for the other animals. It was nice to have some help, and he assured Katy that he knew a great deal about just about everything. "Do you know what a hedgehog eats?" Katy asked. "Just a girl, Katy, you could not possibly fit an entire hedgehog in this ugly little dungeon." "There's a hedgehog right there, in the blue ice cream tub." Katy pointed at the hedgehog. Winston groaned and winced as he limped over to the ice cream container. Katy was pretty sure he was limping on the wrong leg. It had been the other leg that had been so horribly implied the night before, but she didn't say anything. "Oh, that!" Winston shook his head. "That is not a hedgehog. That is a puffly spike." Commander Sparks grumbled at them, harumphed and rolled over on his bathroom mat. He was trying to finish his early morning nap. "I'm pretty sure that's a hedgehog," Katy whispered. I am quite sorry, just a girl, Katy, but a hedgehog is as large as a mountain. Winston didn't whisper. It didn't seem to bother him that Commander Sparks wanted to sleep some more. Well, actually, a hedgehog is a bit smaller than a mountain, but not so small that you might think of it as a hill. That uncivilized little creature is a puffly spike, and a puffly spike is a creepivore. It's a what? Katy asked. A creepivore, Winston said, clearly annoyed at having to explain such a simple bit of science. That is the proper and scientific way to say that it eats creepy little things. Scientifically speaking, all uncivilized animals are either creepivores or bloomivores. Bloomivores eat flowers. What about the animals that eat little bits of apples? Katy asked. Like that bird. Ooh, a foil bird is a bloomivore, Winston said very smartly. But apples aren't flowers, Katy said. Apples are just flowers that got all fat, Winston said, sounding quite reasonable. It happens to a lot of flowers. They don't exercise very much. That doesn't sound right, Katy said. Science seldom sounds right. Winston twisted the tip of his moustache as he spoke. Still, it is very important to speak scientifically. It makes you much more civilized, and if you are not civilized, you may as well just go eat bugs. Commander Sparks grumbled at them again. Katy went back to whispering. Should we go and catch some bugs and see if it will eat them? Yes, we shall, Winston said. That sounds like a very prudish thing to do. Katy grabbed a toy teapot to put the bugs in, but when she opened the door to the kitchen, she saw Fiona sitting at the table with a book and a cup of coffee. Good morning, Katy, Fiona said cheerfully. Is my little animal doctor ready for some breakfast? Not just yet. Katy closed the door partway to make sure Fiona couldn't see Winston. I need to take care of the hedgehog first. Puffly spike! Winston pronounced the word very slowly and very clearly and quite loudly, getting another grumble from Commander Sparks and another frown from Fiona. Shh! Katy hissed and shut the door a little more. Katy, what are you playing at with that funny voice? Fiona asked, frowning. Nothing, Fiona, Katy said, pulling the door closed. So is that the evil witch that has imprisoned you in this horrible little dungeon? Winston asked loudly. Let me see the foul thing before she makes soup out of you. Shh, Katy hissed, pushing Winston out the doggy door before she climbed out herself. It was still early in the morning and the breeze was chilly as she headed for the shed. My room isn't a dungeon and Fiona isn't a witch. She's my almost stepmother. An almost stepmother? Winston scurried to follow Katy. Then he remembered he was supposed to have a hurt leg, groaned and started limping. That is even more evil than a stepmother. Fiona is not evil, Katy grumbled at him and stomped her way around behind the garden shed. I bet she makes soup a lot. Winston quit pretending to limp and went back to scrambling to keep up with Katy. The evilest ones are always making soup out of your bones and serving you for supper. Fiona doesn't even really know how to make soup. Katy lifted up one of the boards on the ground. There were lots of little bugs underneath. She buys soup in a can. Soup in a can? That's even worse! Winston helped her catch the bugs. He was very good at it. It looked like he ate some of them instead of putting them in the toy teapot, but his little hands moved so fast that Katy couldn't tell for sure. Soup in a can sounds even more evil. I already told you that Fiona is not evil, Katy said. She takes care of me and feeds me and everything. Of course she feeds you and takes care of you, Winston said. She has to fatten you up before she makes soup out of you. Everyone knows that prisoners with fat bones make far better soup. I'm not a prisoner, Katy hissed. She was starting to get angry. Will Fiona the evil almost stepmother let you run away? Winston asked. Of course not, Katy said. Then you are a prisoner, Winston said. That is just simple science. Am not a prisoner, Katy shouted. You don't know anything. Katy, you are just a girl and I am a fountain of knowing, Winston said sternly. I am so smart that I often cannot understand the incredibly smart things that I am thinking. Katy, Fiona called. Who are you talking to out there? No one, Fiona, Katy said. I am a someone, Winston shouted. I am Winston the Wise. For goodness sake, Katie. Fiona's voice was already much closer. She was almost to the shed. What are you up to? You be quiet or I'll make soup out of you, Katie whispered sternly at Winston as she grabbed him by the ears. Turning around, she hid him behind her back just as Fiona stepped around the corner of the shed. What did you say about soup? Fiona asked. I'm just catching bugs, Katie said. What on earth for? Fiona frowned, leaning a little to try to look at what Katie was hiding. To feed the hedgehog, Katie said. Puffly Spike? Winston whispered, and Katie squeezed his ears, getting a squawk out of him. What are you hiding behind your back? Fiona asked. And why do you keep making that silly little voice? A hedgehog is a creepervore, Katie said, trying to distract Fiona by talking about science. That's a scientific word that means it eats bugs. Creepervore is not a scientific word, sweetie, Fiona said, laughing. Who told you such a silly thing? It's not a silly thing, Winston snarled from behind Katie's back. It is quite silly, sweetie, Fiona said. Insectivore is the scientific word for an animal that eats bugs. But technically, an insectivore is really just a type of carnivore. The proper scientific word is creepervore, you evil almost stepmother, Winston shouted, squirming and kicking his little feet against the backs of Katie's legs. Katie gave Winston's ears another squeeze. Stop squeezing my ears, or I will have to be harsh at you, Winston shouted. I think I've had just about enough of this game, young lady, Fiona said sternly. Now stop making that voice and show me what you are hiding behind your back. Katie knew she shouldn't show Winston to Fiona. She knew that adults simply could not deal with strange and bothersome things, and Winston was both strange and very bothersome. Now, young lady, Fiona growled. Katie showed Winston to Fiona. Now that is a surprise. Everyone knows that grown-ups either never find out about the weird and bothersome things in a story, or they only find out about the weird and bothersome things at the very, very end, when it is too late for them to help. It probably should have gone that way in Katie's story as well. But here we are just barely past the little chapter full of bother, and Katie is showing Winston to Fiona. This will probably go quite poorly. Fiona's eyes were wide and she looked very disturbed. Katie was sure that she would run away screaming and maybe call the police or animal control. Instead, Fiona whispered, What is that thing? I am not a what or a that or a thing, Winston shouted. I am a whom. Fiona stepped back a bit, but instead of running away and calling the army or something, she crouched and peered at Winston, frowning. It was a serious frown, but Katie could see that it was a thinking frown, not an angry or annoyed frown. It talks, Fiona muttered. I do not talk, I speak, and I am not an it, Winston shouted. Is your almost stepmother's brain so evil that you cannot understand the simple scientific concept of a speaking whom? Fiona's frown got even more thoughtful, and then got a little smiley. She shook her head and chuffed to herself, muttering, Fascinating. I am not fascinating! Winston made a snarly face and raised his hands like claws. I am Winston the Ferocious, and I will slay you if I have to. You're ferocious, are you? Fiona asked, smirking. Ferocious is not nearly a big enough word for how ferocious I am. Winston tried to make his little voice sound all big and tough. Well, good. The ferocious ones always make the tastiest soup, Fiona said, standing back up and nodding her head. Katie, why don't you skin him and chop him up while I go and fetch my bone-boiling pot? Katie was horrified. She was too stunned to say anything other than, What? Mwahaha! Fiona cackled, making her eyes big and scary. You don't really want to cut me up for soup, do you? Winston squeaked and waved his hands, pleading. You're right, Fiona smiled, at first nice and then wicked. Best we boil you alive. The splashing and the screaming are terribly annoying, but it makes the soup so much tastier. Ark! Winston panicked. His little legs started running frantically in the air. Help! Help! I'm going to be souped! Relax, both of you. I'm kidding, Fiona giggled and stuck out her tongue. I heard all your silly nonsense about evil stepmothers making soup, little fuzzy bro. I thought it was just Katie playing some silly game, but it was you all along. Honestly, you are one loud and annoying little talking rabbit weasel. Winston stopped running in the air and meekly said, "No soup?" "No soup," Fiona said. "But I did do the mwahaha part really good, didn't I?" "Oh yes, you did that ever so good." Winston nodded with fast little nods. He was still really scared. "You're not going to freak out or anything like that?" Katie asked Fiona. "I suppose that I probably should be freaking out, shouldn't I?" Fiona admitted. "But nah." "But you're a grown-up," Katie said. "I'm only technically a grown-up," Fiona said. "Yeah, but you should still probably be saying, 'No, this can't be real,' or something like that," Katie said. "That's what a grown-up would do." "Katie, I can see that he's real," Fiona said. "He's right here in front of me, all darty-eyed and still a little worried that I'm going to make soup out of him." Winston's eyes went wide and he trembled. "Oh, relax," Fiona said. "I have no idea how to make soup." "Really?" Winston asked meekly. "No idea at all?" "Clueless, I promise," Fiona said. Winston sighed. "I would, however, like to figure out what you are and where you came from," Fiona said to Winston sweetly. "I am not a what?" Winston said pouty. Yes, you are a whom. I hear you. We all want to be a whom, not a what," Fiona said. "How about we start with where you came from?" "I came from the other place," Winston said. "The other place?" Fiona frowned. "Where's the other place?" "Well," Winston said, "it's like here, there, and everywhere, but it's not this place, nor is it that place, nor is it some place. I often wish it was some place else. Everyone would like to be from some place else, but it's not. I am from the other place." "Seriously, bro?" Fiona huffed. "How about if you quit playing the fuzzy little philosopher and you just show me where you're from?" "I would be glad to," Winston said, "but my legs are currently too short to reach the ground." "Oh, sorry." Katie set Winston back down on the ground. "Thank you," Winston said, taking a moment to rub his ears and straighten his vest before suddenly becoming perplexed. "You don't actually know where this other place is, do you?" Fiona asked. "I simply need to retrace my steps." Winston turned around and started carefully walking backwards. "Retracing your steps always takes you to where you are from." "I'm going to have time to make myself another cup of coffee, aren't I?" Fiona asked Katie. "Yep," Katie said. "Pretty sure you will." Winston tripped over his tail and fell on his bum. "I think I'll have some breakfast," Katie said. "Excellent idea," Fiona said, gesturing dramatically for Katie to lead her back to the kitchen. "I could make you some gruel, since you're a prisoner in that awful little dungeon and all." "I do miss having a real bedroom," Katie said. "I miss it a lot." "I know, sweetie," Fiona said. "But your dad had to sell the house to be able to buy the section and build the house he's working on now. That's how he makes a living, building houses and selling them." "I know," Katie said. "But I still miss having a real bedroom and I miss having Daddy around. We used to do lots of stuff." "Things will get better when I finish school and get a job," Fiona said. "I promise, and that's a for real promise." It must be said that grown-ups have become much better at dealing with strange and bothersome things over the years, but Fiona's reaction was still quite remarkable. There weren't many adults who would be more curious than scared, and Fiona was profoundly curious. All the science that Fiona knew, which is a great deal of science indeed, said that Winston was impossible. But she also knew that a great many things that had once been impossible had turned out to be real. Everyone used to think that airplanes, rockets to the moon, even sailing around the world were impossible. So, she explained to Katie, maybe Winston and the other place were like those things. Fiona was thinking like mad about the other place. Her thoughts were very scientific, and it was fair to say that every scientific thing she thought thrilled her. She liked thinking scientific thoughts, and she couldn't help but smile when she thought the very best ones. Those smiles and happy thoughts, however, would soon flitter away because something dreadful was about to happen.